Alright guys, this is Ross from All Inclusive Building Company, and today I want to show you a project that I'm going to be doing this weekend. And here we have a tabletop, sort of like a counter that I am going to be doing an epoxy pour on. We just did one of these for a customer and it looked so awesome. I had to have it for myself. We're here in my garage this weekend, and this is pretty much my space. You know, this is where I'm working through the week. And this is essentially my desk where I do all my computer work, everything. And so I just wanted to look cool. And so this weekend we're just going to be doing that exact project, and I'm just going to show you how to get started. And so the first thing, I did a couple things off camera, and one of the first things that I did was I sanded this baby down with 220 grit just to make sure there were no bumps or anything, because it is an aftermarket product. I just, you never know. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be taking this Bare all-in-one paint and primer, just a flat white color, just to prep the surface on. And so the reason that I'm using this Bare paint and primer all-in-one is because if any of the epoxy shows through, because some of it is still translucent, I don't want any of the wood grain showing through with some of the colors that I chose. And the color scheme that we're going to be going with is, I've got these purples right here, and these are all Rust-Oleum paint and primer. And so I've got some purples, I've got some gold and blacks, and I got some white spray paint. And with those spray paints, what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to mix that with the epoxy, and it's going to help, obviously add different dimensions and different layers to that epoxy. And these two are made by Alumilite. These are dyes that get added to the epoxy, and it helps the epoxy from being any sort of transparent. And the other colors that I've got going on to add into it are these mica powders. You can just buy these on Amazon right here. I've got gold, I've got white, and which is white silver, and a little bit of purple. That's just going to help add some metallic little look through the entire project. But I'm pretty excited how this is going to turn out. I think that the purples, using those as my accents, are really going to hit it off with the black and gold, which is my primary color that I'm going to be trying to get across. Alright, usually you would have a paint stick for this or shake the can up, but I've already opened the can. That's a rookie move. So I'm just going to use this tongue depressor because I'm a degenerate and I don't keep paint sticks in my garage like I should. But this tongue depressor will be just fine to do the job, just to get it all mixed up well. And so the cool part about this is a lot of people worry whenever they're painting, about drips and making sure it's all even. But the cool thing, because this is going to be our underlayer, it doesn't even have to be that perfect, which is why I'm not going to be using a roller. I'm not going to be using a paintbrush. I'm just going to be using my hands, and that's why I'm wearing these gloves. Because honestly, I don't want to really, I'm going to have to clean a paintbrush later with the epoxy, and I don't want to have to do that with a different kind of cleaner just for, paint. So I'm just going to pour some out here and just get some and, just smooth it over. And like I said, there's no technique to doing this. It doesn't have to look a certain way. You're just trying to make sure that all that wood just goes away. Because what I'm actually going to be doing too is once this finally dries, I'm going over it with 220 grit sandpaper anyway. But what I'm also going to add is some of that spray paint that I have. I will kind of fog it over this surface to, if any of that translucent epoxy still shows through, maybe we might be able to get some more dimensions of colors and layers, stuff like that. So let's just get all this, Like I said, this does not have to be perfect by any means. What I like a lot about these epoxy projects, you'll find that it is really, really difficult to screw it up. I mean, it's kind of absurd how, mistake-friendly it is, because most mistakes, you can kind of make it look like it was done like that on purpose. All right, so right here, I am totally fine with where this is at. What I will say is on epoxy projects, one of the most important things to do is shake the heck out of your spray paint. That's going to really help make sure that no solids, little dots just come out, because those are the things that aren't necessarily going to get broken up in the epoxy. So it's better off just to be able to make sure that it's a smooth, clean spray every single time you're using spray paint, especially when you're spraying it in the epoxy. And so now all that I'm doing is I'm not going for a flat sheen with this spray paint. I just want to fog it. I just want to add it to certain areas just to add some accent. So I added some of my dimension colors. I added my black, I added my gold, and I added some purple. And so obviously you can see that the white isn't shining through as much as it was before. Clearly, you put spray paint over it. So what I'm doing, because I don't plan on using as much white in the epoxies, is I'm just coming back over it with a little bit more white to help brighten it from the bottom. Another thing is, obviously this is not what a spray job, a paint job, should look like. There's just marks everywhere. If you were to get down here, you just see ripples, and that's okay. Don't be worried about that. What we're really looking for is just to be able to get the colors on there, sand it down with 220, add the epoxy, everything is going to look just fine. All right, so now I've added my colors. I'm fine with how everything's looking. I don't see really any wood grain shining through that I'm worried about. Even if there are some, the epoxy for the most part, we'll take care of that because the paint's already there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit for a couple hours until it's dry, and then we will sand it with 220, and then we'll go from there. All right, so typically what you'd want to do is you'd want to put down, paint and primer, let that dry, 220 grit, and then do another paint and primer, add some colors, whatever. However, I was a little bit impatient, and I'm on a little bit of a time crunch for this weekend. So because it was mine, not doing it for a customer, I thought, why not? I'm just going to roll with it, see what happens. So the next step would be to sand it. I already went through all that. So the next part is the fun part, pouring our epoxy. So when it comes to the epoxy that I'm going to be using is made by Stone Coat Countertops. It is an awesome product. I love it. I'll always use this epoxy. They have some great videos on YouTube about how to do this kind of stuff. And so with their just regular old Stone Coat Countertop epoxy, we're looking for 3 ounces per square foot of surface. This surface is about 9 square feet. So did a little bit of calculation. Alexa, how many ounces are in a quart? 32.
So there's 4 cups in a quart. There's 2 cups in a pint.
Right.
All right.
We need, 0.85 quarts to cover this entire surface. So I'm just going to make up 1 quart of epoxy and go from there. So really the best part right here is just to have all of the stuff that you're going to need in front of you, ready to go, ready to rock and roll, so you don't have to stop what you're doing. Luckily with this Stone Coat Countertop stuff, there is a really good amount of working time with it, but still time is of the essence. You don't want the epoxy to go ahead and start curing while you're trying to mix colors and stuff. All right, so the stuff that I want to have in front of me is, I want to have my mixing buckets. These little buckets I'm going to be using to mix some of the colors in. I got my powders over here, your epoxy obviously, and the spray paint that you're going to be using. Something else that I want to have around is a drill with a paddle mixer that's going to help really make this epoxy mix easier rather than using your hand. Another thing I have is the 70% alcohol put in a spray bottle. That is going to be able to help a pretty cool look whenever you spray some of the spray paint on. The other things are, I got my tiny little shovel that I will be using to scoop the mica powder and paintbrush. That's going to help to kind of get rid of the man-made look of some of the pores. Call this a chop brush. You go in and you just kind of help things meld together better. The one other thing that is not a necessity, you have two options for it. One is just a heat gun to help get some of the air bubbles, out of the epoxy as you're going. The second option that you have is to use a blowtorch to help blow the bubbles out using the heat as you're pouring the epoxy, because the bubbles are kind of your worst enemy at this point. Because those can become encapsulated in the epoxy. You'll be able to see them, or they're going to make issues at the surface of your epoxy. So I think that I've got everything in front of me, so I'm going to go ahead and start mixing. This epoxy right here is a 1-to-1 ratio. So what I've realized is this is not going to be a big enough pour to where I'm going to need this big of a bucket for my epoxy. Because the epoxy will only really go up to about right there, and trying to get the bit in there to mix it is going to be pointless. So what you're going to want to do is just use a smaller one, and since you're going to be using this, if you do, just be more careful, that it doesn't splatter and everything like that, but it should be fine. So right here, I've got my epoxies. I've got my B and my A. Whenever you buy epoxies, they typically come like this, and it's just, they won't start curing until these two mixtures really come together. So what I'm going to do, because these quart buckets are so small, I'm actually just going to work in two 1-quart, 2 half-quart segments, if that makes sense. And so whenever you're mixing these two epoxies, what you're going to see is that this goes from sort of a clear color to being almost pearl in color, and it's very opaque. That's okay. It's going to clear back up once it settles, once it's poured and settled. And you're going to want this to mix for about 2 minutes to make sure that it's all thoroughly mixed together. All right, and then in this one, because I want black to be most of the thick color that I'm using across, so I'm going to grab my black dye, and 1 drop of this goes a long way. And so what it's going to do is it's going to turn this epoxy really into like an opaque black that you can't necessarily see through. All right, I got my black dye in there. I'm gonna go ahead and let it get back going. All right, so I got my black right here, and I've got what's gonna be my clear right here. And so now what I'm gonna wanna do is divvy this clear up into different containers that I can add spray paint to, or my powders that will help color that clear epoxy, so we can use it in multiple different places to really get a different cool effect going on. So there's really no science behind what I'm doing here. I'm just pouring just a little bit here, a little bit there, and we'll add some to this one right here. And another thing that I want to do is I am going to take some of my black here, because I'm going to want to add some gold powder to this black. So that way, in some of the black that's being used, you're going to be able to see, hopefully see some, gold metallic flake come through. And so I'm going to want to take these gloves off as they are covered in paint and epoxy as I deal with these powders. So I'm going to take my little shovel here, and there's not necessarily a certain weight or amount that I'm going for here. I'm just kind of going until I think it's right. You just kind of go with it and see what you think. So I'm actually going to use a pretty big spoonful in this black to really hope that it helps shine through some. All right, I'm going to take this purple here. And I'm going to be adding that to one of my clear epoxies. And then I'm going to do the same with this silver, but I'm actually going to be adding some of that to the other black epoxy that I have to try to get some silver specks come through in other parts of the black epoxy. Alright, so now I'm also going to be adding some of my white coloring just to another one of these to get an opaque white that I'm going to try to use for some veins and just intermittently. Alright, so now that I have all of these filled with just the powder and dyes, one thing, if I can get this to screw on, one thing that's good about this part is you don't have to use the big regular mixer. You can just use regular old tongue depressors from here to just mix this epoxy in. Alright, and so in that one, I'm going to mix some of this purple, lighter purple spray paint into it. So what I ultimately will end up with is 1, 2, 3 translucent epoxies that will have powder in them. I will have 3 opaque epoxies, one with gold, one just black with some of that white additive, and a just white epoxy with the white dye. And so it's really important, especially as this pour is about to happen, and just wear the gloves. You just don't want to have to deal with that epoxy getting, on your hands and then having to get the acetone to get it off. It's really just not worth it. What you can do is just take your entire roll of paper towels and just kind of brush it off. That's really just going to help. If any dust had settled, anything you don't want on there necessarily, it's really just going to help just clean it off some. All right. So I actually am going to use my big bucket because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pour all of these colors in the bucket and just use the entire bucket to do my entire pour. The way that this epoxy works is these colors aren't necessarily going to meld together once you pour them in there. It'll do a pretty good job of them staying apart. And so it's kind of cool too here that you can use your spray paints and spray them in your big bucket, and you'll see that it kind of helps some of those colors come through too. I'm just going to add a little bit of white to that. Let's just grab some. Honestly, there's no method to how I'm adding it, what I'm going to add, when I'm going to add it. I'm just kind of going with it just to see what happens. Alright, So now that I'm about to do the actual pour of the epoxy, just make sure that your space around on the bottom here of your, just make sure that you have space around the piece to work with. Because you're going to end up wanting to melt some colors, so on and so forth. And so what I'm going to be doing is there's no certain way I'm going to pour it. I'm just going to pour it and see what happens. So let's just start here. That looks sick. That looks so cool. Maybe I'll do some circles here. All right. So now I'm going to take one of my tongue depressors here, and I am going to just kind of squeegee it around the entire base. Another thing that I'm going to want to do is just kind of let it pour down on its own. And so now, see, I really like the way that looks, so I'm not going to want to mess with that too much. Instead, I'm just going to make sure that I get a nice even coat, and I'm going to play with some spray paint over here to try to get more of that purple to come through. And so it helps on this part. I just couldn't find mine to have a square trowel to help spread this around much more evenly. It helps with the entire process, but you know what they say, you'll have that on these big jobs. So I'm just going to keep using this tongue depressor to really just get all of this epoxy spread. And whatever epoxy is running over the sides, use that and use your glove to just really rub it in there. Really get the epoxy on the side. Just going to make your life easier so you don't really see that side of the project. You can even take what's just gathering on the table, just wipe it up and just start rubbing it in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these spray paints and I'm going to spray paint in different places and use my chop brush and a paper towel to really try to get you know, some of it to look more natural. Let's just grab this white. I'll show you what I'm talking about. and it's creating some texture, but don't worry about that. The epoxy itself is self-leveling, so it's going to work its way back down. Plus, using the heat gun or blowtorch will also help meld that together. But what's going to make this look cool is if I now get some gold over that, I take the paper towel. Okay, and so also what I'm going to do is I have a good amount of epoxy left in some of these buckets. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of create veins throughout the entire piece. And so this is that shiny white going over the opaque white to maybe give it a little bit of that vein, a little bit of shine, you know. I think this thing's gonna look awesome. Grab this spray paint here, and if you do that, and you grab your alcohol, what it does is it creates a almost granite-like effect because it's just that paint reacting with the alcohol. It's creating tiny little bubbles in where that got sprayed at to, yeah. Once it's finished, you'll really be able to see that come through. But let's just now take our chop brush, and these, although I really like this little tadpole looking thing, that looks man-made, and those are the parts that I'm going to be trying to get out of it, because I don't want this to look like a man-made. I want it to look like Mother Nature did it. So very randomly, we're just going to chop that guy away. Another technique is if you want to add color in certain places, just get it on your chop brush and just let the chop brush really just integrate that wherever you think your piece needs that to go. And I'm just taking my chop brush down the sides here. And it's okay to see some of your, paint, primer, whatever on the side. That's fine, because some of it might be translucent. I don't think I want to add anything. I think I'm okay with that right there, this right here, and the negative space. Yeah. So now I'm going to grab my heat gun. And if you see spots where you think it should be melded together better, use this, because the force, the air coming off the heat gun, will really help meld some of those colors together. but I don't really think this one needs it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to bring out the blowtorch right after I chop this area right here. And so when you're doing this, you know, you might notice some spots where, like right here, I think just a paint glob from working on the table fell into it. And so what I learned from the guys over at Stone Coat Countertops, this is a pretty neat trick. You just take your tongue depressor here, and I wish I had the adult size ones, but you break it in half and you just kind of use it as chopsticks to get whatever it is out of there without disturbing the piece too much. And so just a few more things that I want to add to this is I want to grab this white here. There. Oh, yeah.
That gold spot was a great decision. It looked really good.
And all right, y'all, so we let this cure overnight. It is looking awesome. So many of the colors just spread out more. It's settled evenly. So now what I'm going to do to really get a nice top coat on top of this is I'm going to take my orbital sander here. If you don't have an orbital sander, just regular old 220 grit sandpaper would work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rough this surface up to get a better, to get it scratched and swirled, so when I pour a top coat on top of this, that the new epoxy will have something to hold on to for a really good mechanical bond. And that top coat is essentially just going to really just make sure that any of the imperfections are kind of out of this now, and any little nibs here, they're all gonna, you know, get away, and we'll be able to deal with that. So without further ado, so I got that all sanded up. Don't worry that it looks clouded now. Don't worry that there are scratches and scuffs. Once you get that top coat on there, you're not even going to be able to notice. And so now I'm just going to take this sanding sponge, just try to get these corners a little bit more. And this is just a 220 grit sanding sponge. So I'm going to take my paper towels and just try to get all that excess dust just come right off there. All right, so now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to our Stone Coat Countertop Epoxy, and same thing, I need, you know, 3 quarts per square foot, so I'm going to mix up the same amount that I had yesterday. Alright, just do one more wipe off to make sure nothing got trapped on there. Alright, now we're just going to pour this mainly in the middle. And we're going to take our 1/8 inch trowel and just kind of spread this around. So here, guys, we're just trying to spread it as evenly as possible before we start trying to get this to go over the edge. And you know, yeah, the epoxy looks like a milk white right now, but as it cures, it's going to cure to be completely crystal clear. All right, y'all, so now that I have a good amount on there, I want to start bringing some towards the end here. All right, so all this excess, got to get it on the sides. Just make sure that we just get a clear, symmetrical coverage all down the entire side. All right, and once you're satisfied with the coverage and everything, now is the time to get out your blowtorch and take care of those bubbles. All right, so now some of you all might be worried about drips that are accumulating on the bottom of the piece. Don't worry about that. Once this piece cures, probably tomorrow, I'll flip it over and take a metal sanding disc on an angle grinder and just buff those down because always keep in mind, it is the bottom of your piece, it is the bottom of the table, it is the bottom of the countertop, so on and so forth. It hardly ever gets seen. You could, if you wanted to, flip the piece over and paint it down there or something like that, but I guarantee the dining room table that you've got sitting at home, when's the last time you've seen the underside of it? Who really cares? So I wouldn't really be worried about those, but yeah, once this piece cures, and this is going to cure pretty clear, it's going to be kind of crazy how it's going from this white to being clear, and then I'll flip it over, buff those out, and it's ready to be a computer desk. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for these epoxy pours, and that's why I love to do them so much. They can be used as a countertop, they can be used as shower walls, they can be used as a flooring. The opportunities are endless for this stuff. So if you know that you got an old shower that you want to make look new, if you have an old kitchen that it just needs to be, lightened up a bit, but you don't want to go spend 10 grand so odd on some marble or granite, something like that, call us. Call the All-Inclusive Building Company. You can find our info on Facebook, or you can check us out online at www.aibuildingco.com. That's www.aibuildingco.com. You give us a call, let us know that you've got a project in mind, let us help you. You get to choose your own colors. You can tell us what you want it to look like. We'll get it done to suit your needs rather than trying to find a piece of marble or a piece of granite, a piece of stone that is kind of what you're looking for, because this is going to look awesome when it's done. I can't wait to show you all what it's finished.